Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I would like to address one particular request from one of the members here. Here's a question on how do the square waves look on typical tape recorder. And to be frank, I have seen square waves going through the tape recorders, but somehow it didn't quite register in my mind. I don't really care much about how the waveforms look. I really care about how the equipment sounds. And sure enough, I don't expect good sounding equipment measure very badly. No, far from it. But at the same time, I've seen perfectly measuring equipment sound awful. So I would say somewhere between those two extremes, there is a good sound. But still the question remains, we have equipment specifically designed for sound reproduction. And square wave, well, within reason, could be called sound. So it is natural to ask this question. How do they measure? How do their square wave responses look? And today I'll try to answer some of those concerns. So what I'm going to be doing is feeding my tape recorders, some of my tape recorders, the square wave, specifically 10 kilohertz square wave. That's a signal sometimes used for that type of torture test. And we'll see how well they perform with that type of signal. I'm going to be doing it sort of live. I don't have systems set up for multiple machines. So we're going to be moving from one machine to another. Specifically, we're going to be doing, I think, 3 machines, simply because they are conveniently located at the moment. I don't feel like moving around heavy machines, and doing those 3 machines will give us very good idea about what is happening. And I'm going to start with my trusty Ampex ATR-102. The next one is going to be Studer A810. And I will tell you in a minute why specifically that model, why it makes a lot of sense. And the last one is probably going to be Sony APR-5003, simply because it's sitting in a convenient location. So, as I mentioned, one of the participants today is going to be the Studer A810, and there is good reason for that. So let's talk a little bit in general terms first, and then we'll identify this model as a good representative here. For a long time, people have been looking at the square wave responses of different machines, and they found them to be wanting. They were not perfect reproduction of square waves. Specifically, their fronts were softened, and sometimes they would be ringing like crazy. All that stuff is not desirable. So naturally, the question came up for the designers how to get rid of that particular distortion, how to compensate for it. And the term phase compensation was born. It was specifically designed by the Studer team in order to address this particular type of signal distortion. According to most accounts, this particular Studer was the first model to introduce this particular circuitry to address this issue. And if you look at this chart, I'll try to explain to you what is happening here. Essentially, this is the signal you're feeding in. It's a perfect square wave. But what comes out is somewhat rounded, resembling square wave signal, sometimes with heavy ringing. It can have ringing on top and bottom, which is even more undesirable. And the question was, how do you avoid getting that? So the engineers came up with a solution where they look at the difference between the two signals and they differentiate the difference actually twice, and they get signal which kind of looks like that, and it contains the information about this particular distortion. So now what they do, they take this distortion product and feed it into the summing box with this signal, with the hope that what comes out is again the perfect square wave. Okay, it makes sense. And today we're going to find out how well actually this approach works. We're going to run the test on this Studer and see whether it works much better than an Ampex ATR-102, which doesn't have this particular phase compensation circuitry. That would be an interesting test to compare the two very different worlds, if you will. The world before the phase compensation and the world after that. Since Studer introduced this particular feature, some other companies also designed it into their machines. I don't know about my Sony APR. I believe it has it, but I know for the fact that the Atari MTR definitely has it. So in order to run this test, I had to rearrange my test gear somewhat. So you see I moved my scope into the convenient position, and to the right from it there is a signal generator that generates 10 kilohertz square wave signal. Is it really that signal? Let's check. When I go to my Ampex, let's look at the incoming signal. And sure enough, it is a very nice, a little bit smoothed out square wave. Why is it smoothed out? Because it goes through the recording circuit of the Ampex. It's not what you see coming from your signal generator. It is already a result of some of the circuitry inside the Ampex. That's fine. So now let's run recording. We'll record this signal and we'll look again, or look now, at its replica. And this is as pretty much as I described to you in my chart. You see it retains the same frequency, same magnitude, but it now softened. And that's very typical of tape recorders. This is not a bad signal. Remember, it is 10 kilohertz already. It's very high frequency. And it still retains most of the character of the square wave. So that's going to be our benchmark. Before we look at the next component, just try to draw the mental picture and image and memory of this particular chart. So now we are feeding this 10 kilohertz signal into the Studer. This is the input waveform, just like as you remembered. And now let's look at the output. Disregard the fact that output amplitude is larger. It simply is the setting on the tape recorder. But the character is different now. You are definitely seeing this peak here and peak here, which were not there before. on the previous charts or previous oscillograms. And that's a result of phase compensation system working. Remember, I showed you this little peak on the bottom here. And now you're watching the result of adding this peak to the signal. It adds up here and here, just this little tiny triangle, the red one on the plot. Why is it overcompensating, you might ask? Well, this is strictly the designer's choice. They could have stopped earlier. They could have just squared out the front edge of the signal a little bit and then go flat, more or less flat. They went a little bit overboard in my view. But like I said, it is their choice. It is built in the system. As far as I know, there is no control for that in the machine. If there is, I'm not aware of it yet. Let's watch again. This is the input signal. And this is the output. In some sense, they are closer together now. There is less of the edge softening. So yeah, you can make a case it is a more perfect signal now. And now I switch to the Sony APR-103. Again, you're watching the same input signal that looks very, very similar. But let's see what happens if I switch to reproduce signal. The signal now resembles the sine wave more than square wave. This is not surprising at 10 kilohertz, but still I would expect a little bit more square signal there. By the way, in all three cases the machines are running at 15 inches per second speed. So let's see what happens if I change the speed on the Sony. Going to 30 inches per second. Once again, this is the input signal. And now I'm switching to the output. You see, this one is interesting. It almost looks like, if you ask my opinion, it looks like there is some attempt at phase compensation going on. But this front is undercompensated. Just like we saw on Studer, it was overcompensated. There was a peak here. In this case, it's undercompensated. So in this case, I would say if there is an adjustment within this machine, it should be turned up a little bit more, and then you have a very good shot at perfect soft square wave. Once again, input signal. And output. we can certainly see that 30 inches per second output is better than it was for 15 inches. And that's how it should be. The frequency response is wider and the characteristics are flatter in this area. But I would still expect a little bit better job from 15 inches per second. Let's see it again. You see, more and more it looks like sinusoid. So I would say it definitely needs some help. So what does all this mean to a customer, to music lover? In some sense, today you visited the sausage making factory. You've seen some good and some ugly of the internal operation. Most people never look like that. They buy tape machines, they listen to music, they never run square wave tests on their machines, and that's fine. And they sound good, they love the sound, they enjoy the music. And that's how it should be. To some degree, this obsession with the perfect square wave, I think it's counterproductive, if you ask me. The circuit I designed usually reproduces it very, very well, but I don't spend time perfecting the square wave shape. It just happens naturally. And that's how it should be, I believe. And when you're talking about difference between Ampex and the Studer, Ampex being completely uncompensated, and Studer having, I would say, a little bit too much of it. I still believe Ampex sounds better, at least to my ears. Yes, Studer has very good sound. I told you recently that I like it in some respect on some music, but I think overall Ampex is the better package. With all the defects and with all the imperfection to the square wave it reproduces. So that's it for today. And I understand some of you might become confused, but like I said, normally we don't visit the sausage factories, we just enjoy their products. And I think that's how it should be in this case too. So let's listen to this beautiful piece of music as played on my Ampex. And now I just realized that we have some time left for the recording, and I forgot to give you the picture of Ampex doing 30 inches per second. So let's do that. So once again, this is the input waveform, 10 kilohertz square wave from the Ampex. And this is its output. Notice the softened square wave. This is 15 inches per second. So let's switch to 30. See, it's very different now. But it is different not in the way that Studer did it. If you remember, Studer, due to its compensation circuitry, put the peak here on the front edge of the signal, not on the trailing edge. But nonetheless, this is an interesting result. So you just might record it in your memory. Once again, this is 30-inch signal, and this is 15 inch per second. Basically a softer curve, but you can see some tendency for the peak at the trailing edge of the signal. All that reflects the particular nature of the internal circuitry of this particular machine. Nothing wrong with it. It still sounds great. And with that, thank you very much for coming again, and hope to see you again next time. Stay well. Bye-bye.